What I remember from that period, I mean, I didn't specifically know Solstice had returned in 2009, but I knew that during that whole period there was this retro thrash and retro death metal revival where a lot of classic bands were coming back together.
Right.
It seemed like there was a new kind of respect for a lot of the old thrash stuff that maybe didn't happen during the 90s. Did you feel that?
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. Namely Demolition Hammer. We stayed in contact with those guys through the years. Derek and Steve, and we were trying to convince them to come back on the scene. Do a new album or do a tour or do something. I'm sure people would have been dying to see those guys. All the neo thrash bands would always mention them as an influence. And they weren't really convinced. And it wasn't until we played at Maryland Death Fest in 2015, or was it 16? 15, yeah, I think so. And we invited them down there, and that's when it actually hit them that that they're relevant. They're still relevant, to this day. And they were able to regroup, and they got themselves a new drummer, and they did a bunch of touring from like 2016 on. And they kind of, which is really cool, they kind of credit us with, helping in making that happen.
It's funny about Demolition Hammer. Like, I've always liked that band. But when I got the CDs from Century Media, when I ordered the album from Century Media, I got them for like $6 or $8 brand new, just because, nobody really cared about that band 20 years ago.
Right.
They're just trying to get rid of their back stock.
Right.
And now when I go to shows and go to festivals, like, there's so many kids wearing Demolition Hammer t-shirts and hoodies and stuff like that.
Right.
So it's great that people came around to like Solstice and Demolition Hammer eventually, but sometimes I get irritated because like people who heard about that band like 5 years ago will argue with me about whether or not they're really a death metal band or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, man,
right.
Like, nobody cared about this band 20 years ago. Why are you arguing with me?
Yeah, that's the reason. That's what they thought too, But we were trying to convince them for all those years that there's a lot of bands that are out here now playing your style that you were doing back in 91, 90, 90, 91 and shit, and they're pretty much bands like, I don't know, Warbringer, which there's a handful, but it was a lot. Bands that credited Demolition Hammer as an influence and kind of sounded like them, and we were trying to show them that, and they finally saw the light.
So let's talk about this new Solstice album. It's called Casting the Die, and it came out at the end of April. Is that right?
May 7th actually was. It got postponed a couple of weeks because of a little backlog there with vinyl and stuff.
Okay, tell me about your intentions going into this album.
You mean like before we wrote it or before we recorded it?
Yeah, like when you were writing it, like what were you guys hoping to do with this album?
Well, since we started jamming again, when we got Ryan in the band, we did a lot of rehearsing, and stuff would come up, and so we felt like we could probably write an album relatively quickly because Ryan, he's like a riff machine, so he can pump out songs or mostly finished songs in no time at all. And, he's got a great feel. He's got a great style. And we all had ideas, obviously, but, we felt like we could do it relatively quickly. So what we ended up doing was getting the touring out of the way, because there was a lot of people that would, contact us and saying, when are you guys going to tour? I heard you guys are back together. So we wanted to get touring out of the way before we recorded. And that's what happened towards the end of 2016, like late 2016 is when we played our probably our last show. Central America, I think we did like Panama and Costa Rica, and we actually did Peru. And after those shows, it's when we kind of settled down and said, okay, let's write the album now. And like I said, man, we were like already prepared. We each of us had music that we jammed, and we collaborated, and we added, and we jammed some more until, eventually we had over 10 songs. We were shooting for 10. We ended up with 11.
Did you feel any pressure to live up to those early albums or to top them in any way?
No, I would say no. There was no pressure. We felt like we had really good material, which was reminiscent of like our first two albums. And we were happy being in that space, where, our friends would come over and hear it and go, yeah, man, it definitely sounds like, the new stuff could fit somewhere in there. And Ryan's vocals are similar to Rob's. That's what everybody was saying. And obviously we thought so too. So I can't say we felt any pressure. It just kind of flowed. I mean, writing the songs was easy. Recording it was easy. It didn't take us long. So, it was pretty laid back. I wouldn't say there was really any pressure on us to produce any kind of an album one way or the other.
When did you guys actually start working on it in terms of writing music?
We started working on it, say, mid 2016, and we were probably ready by September of 2016, and that's when I believe that's when we started recording it. We took maybe a month or so, a lot of sessions, but it was, like I said, there was no pressure. It was in my studio in Miami, Florida at the time. So, we were just prepared, and we went in there and took care of it, man. It was something that, it was an accomplishment, and we didn't, like I said, we didn't really feel any pressure, and it flowed pretty well. Probably at that point, we'd probably been as tight, musically as we'd ever been.
Did you record and engineer this yourself? Mix it yourself?
Yes, it's recording, mixing, mastering by me.
I mean, as the engineer, as the producer, what was your approach to this album? Did you want it to sound like the old albums? Did you want it to have a more modern sound?
I would say yes and no. I didn't want to. Obviously, I'm recording all in digital now, so nowadays albums sound, it's basically drum samples and amp sims that you get, and stuff like that keeps getting pumped out day after day. So we didn't want to make it sound like something modern. We want to kind of to stick sort of like if we were, recording it on tape, not trying, like time-aligned stuff or, just digital trickery. We didn't want any of that stuff, So I think we were able to do that. There's even, like if you listen really closely, you might, find a couple mistakes on the album that just it didn't matter. It was like a natural mistake and it didn't ruin anything. So we just leave it in. We thought we'd just leave it in just for the hell of it.
And you've recorded most of Solstice's music, right?
I recorded To Dust. I didn't mix it. And the new one. And also I did a remix of our second album, Pray.
And was this the first time in the studio with Ryan?
Yeah, first time with Ryan. Although I had recorded, he had a project in Florida named Combat, which I recorded an EP that they put out like in 2015. So it wasn't the first time I recorded Ryan. It's.
Sorry, did you say that you recorded the sound back in 2016?
Yes, that's when we started recording. Fall of 2016 was when we actually went in there and started laying down drums.
Okay. I'm curious, why is it only coming out now?
Well, the original plan was to record it, get it packaged, and find a label. But things started happening. I ended up moving back to Texas, which is where I'm at now. That happened at the end of 2017. So, and by the time I got over here, the album wasn't mixed yet. I started mixing the album when I first got to Texas in the beginning of 2018. Let's see. I mixed it in maybe a month because obviously there was no rush. And then, when it was done, the plan was still to package it ourselves and release it ourselves. And then, look for a label, look for anyone interested in releasing it. And I believe in sometime in 2019, we got in touch with Michael Anderson from Target Group, Emancipation, and we worked something out to have it released by them.